And we're back with Michael Dirda from the Washington Post. He's a book review critic and who's doing a lecture tonight. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your lecture?
Well, first of all, Avalon, thank you for inviting me to be on the program this morning. It's a great pleasure to be here in Lawrence, even on a bleak day like today. I did wear my Halloween colors.
There you go.
But,
better than me.
I'll be talking about basically my career, such as it is, at the Washington Post. I've worked there for a long time. As we were chatting earlier, and I mentioned that when I started at the newspaper, we still had linotype machines and typewriters, and we sent stories down in pneumatic tubes. And it was a very colorful, even a raffish place, kind of more like the front page, if you know that old classic movie, than today's modern journalism, which is becoming increasingly like working in an insurance office or something. Everyone's hunched over their computer.
Yeah, things sure have changed. I can't believe it. So will you tell us a little bit about what you do, kind of with book reviews and
basically I've spent my whole career as a literary journalist. Although I've written for other parts of the paper, the TV section or Style or Outlook. Mostly I review books, and I mostly review books in what you'd think of as arts and letters, the humanities in general. That is, I review novels, poetry, history, science fiction, fantasy, children's books, mysteries, but I don't write about politics or foreign affairs or anything like that.
More the entertainment side of it.
And I've done this for 35 years. It's shocking when I think about it.
When you actually say it out loud.
Yeah, and I've written about all sorts of books, and one of the great pleasures of having been a journalist, literary journalist, is that I've gotten to meet a lot of interesting people. Both my colleagues, who are wonderful writers in their own right, and many novelists and many well-known figures who write books.
How did you get started in that? How does one become a book critic at the Washington Post?
Probably you don't really plan to do that.
Right.
I mean, the Washington Post is the only newspaper I've ever worked at.
Wow.
I didn't work at a paper in college or anything like that. I grew up in a very working class, blue-collar town, Lorain, Ohio, the same town that Toni Morrison is from. And she and I once had a conversation about growing up in Lorain and what it was like for us and different, slightly different generations and worlds. But I was going to be a college teacher. I went to Oberlin College, and
that was the plan.
And after a lot of checkered couple of years, majored in English, did well, and went to grad school, came to Washington to write a dissertation, taught part-time while I did that, and then was offered some jobs, but nowhere by this time my wife wanted to move.
Oh.
So I stayed in Washington, worked for a computer company for a while, but I could see that the computers were going nowhere and the newspapers were the future.
That was
my usual skills at forecasting. And started writing reviews for the Post. They liked them. After I'd written about a dozen of them, they essentially offered me a job.
Oh, interesting.
It was happenstance, but at the same time I had a really wide-ranging background in books.
Which is funny you said that newspapers were the one, newspapers were going, but now it kind of seems opposite in a way.
Well,
computers are where it's taking off. And
I mean, you would never have thought that the Washington Post would ever be sold, that the Graham family wouldn't own it. It's now been bought by Jeff Bezos at Amazon. That seemed impossible.
Have a lot of things changed since?
Yeah, I mean, when it was, I mentioned the equipment has changed, but the one thing that's really changed in a newsroom is that in the old days, they were incredibly noisy.
I can imagine.
The phones rang every 30 seconds. Typewriters clacked all the time. People were talking all the time. You were allowed to smoke in the newsroom. Old guys wore pork pie hats. It was a colorful, raffish kind of place, and it was exciting. Now you walk into a newsroom, it's dead quiet.
Really?
Phones don't ring.
Oh
Everybody does email. Everyone is looking at a computer. There are TV screens everywhere. And before if you wanted to know the news, you had to run out and find it. But now it's all brought.
Now you can Google it.
You can Google it. You can see it on television. And you know, it was it was amazingly exciting. It's not, it still is, but not because. But in the old with hard news, you have deadlines. Today, because of the internet, you don't have those kind of hard and fast deadlines. You have continuous hard news.
Right.
You know, things are always being updated. But you know, every night, 9 o'clock, the first edition would roll out. You had, you know, the stories had to be ready, and you had this wonderful way. The arc of the day was quiet in the morning, where people were sort of getting assignments and collecting information, and then as the afternoon came, you know, advanced, things got more and more frenetic, more and more exciting as people were going up against deadlines and running around, tearing things out of typewriters, setting them down.
Picking up the phone.
It was like the movies. I came to the Post just after Watergate, so Bob Woodward was still a regular reporter in those days, and he'd review for Book World. I'd see him, and a number of famous, the editor of the New Yorker, David Remnick, was a summer intern. I gave him his first book review. Also, you know, it was a lot of fun. But now, it's still fun, but it's you walk into it, it could be an insurance office.
It's kind of like less personal.
Little cubbies and people.
I can't imagine that.
But that said, you know, news is news. Writers are writers, and the other really wonderful thing about being at a newspaper, or at least a big newspaper like the Post, is that everyone around you is so smart.
Yeah.
It's like it's similar to being at a university.
Right.
The people who cover business for the Washington Post, they had MBAs. The people who wrote about science and medicine had medical degrees.
Right. So you're just surrounded by intelligence.
So it was fun just to go around and talk to people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I didn't know that I would be a journalist. As I said, I thought I'd be a college teacher. But in some ways, I got the best of both worlds, because I got the same kind of environment, but I got to write about books, which I love, for ordinary people. Sometimes in college, you know, the things get a little bit narrow. They become very theoretical, and one of my goals has always been to be a champion of reading and to encourage people to read beyond the bestseller list, to explore genre fiction, to look at all the wonderful books of the past, and to be an enthusiast, a cheerleader for books.
And as you kind of were telling me earlier, how does the process of writing a book review go? Would you kind of explain? How would you begin? Yeah, because you were saying that it wasn't so much opinion, that it was.
Well, I believe that book reviews should be descriptive. That is, you should tell the reader what the book is like. You should quote enough to give a sense of the author's style, and to some degree allow the reader to judge whether this is the sort of book he or she may like. The most important part of writing features or reviews is to be entertaining. As a friend of mine later went to work for Rolling Stone, used to say, you know, writing that isn't fun to read doesn't get read.
Right. That is so true.
You know, maybe hard news, people would just read it because of the facts, but other sorts of features, you have to be entertaining in some fashion. That can be pretty highbrow entertainment, but sometimes this can be very funny and witty.
And even that, I think hard news, a lot of the headlines even just the headlines get read. But then we're in like the entertainment section, it's more of a story like that. But
as for how I review a book, I'm one of these people who can't even read, you know, Agatha Christie mysteries without a pencil in my hand. So I'm marking passages that I think are important. You know, scribbling in the margin ideas I might have. But once I'm done, I spend a lot of time thinking about it. For many years I used to spend a lot of time. Now it comes more easily. But the lead is always important. Sometimes I'd spend an hour trying to get the first sentence or two right. You want to strike the proper tone. You want to, because everything in a sense will fall out of that first sentence down to the end and the kicker, the end of the story. And for me, it's always a fresh experience. Some people have a kind of template, a blueprint in their mind about how they're going to review every book that comes along. I try to approach each book differently. Sometimes I'll be, if for example, if a writer has a really wonderful prose style, I will tamp myself down and I will quote a lot from the book because the author is so wonderful. But if the book is interesting, but the prose is fairly ordinary, then I will come more to the front and I will put in a little more razzle-dazzle of my own in order to make the book and the review as entertaining as I can.
You kind of make the judgment as you go.
So it just depends, and you know, the judgment comes through. Often you have little reservations, and I will usually save any negative comments to closer to the end, the penultimate paragraph usually, because if you say, you know, the first graph, this is the worst book ever, you know, people are going to stop reading.
Like, I'm done, no
We're
more.
done. Unless you're really funny about it, they might want to see more. But otherwise, you talk about what's there, and then you start to put in, well, there's this problem with the book.
Right. So you kind of work it in there.
Yeah. And every review is different. You know, I've collected several books of my essays and reviews, and you can see that the voice is there. This is what you always aim for when you're a journalist or a writer of any kind, is to have a distinctive voice and approach. And mine is definitely enthusiasm and affection for books and reading.
Just make it interesting.
I never wanted to be one of these solemn pontifical kinds of critics, the kind who write editorials in the guise of book reviews. I want to share my pleasure in books with other people, and I want to encourage people to try all sorts of books.
So do you have any advice out there for current journalism students like myself and everyone else at KU? What would you say going out into the workforce as it is now?
Well, things obviously are in flux, in transition. I would say a couple of things. One, besides studying journalism proper, I would urge everyone who is interested in a career in any kind of journalism to learn some subject really well. If you want to report on sports, you really should know sports really well. If you want to write book reviews, you really have to have read a lot of books. You can't count on a journalism degree on its own to carry you in, because the people who are going to hire you are often going to want you to do a specific kind of job. So if you are interested in covering Wall Street, you know, get at least a minor in business. So, and plus, if the journalism career doesn't work out, you've always got something to fall back on.
Which that's the great thing about journalism too. It's not just journalism. You're always learning something, and you can always choose a subject that you love and just go for it.
Well, it's great benefit in that it teaches you to write concisely, clearly, to the point, and that's a skill that all kinds of employers and all kinds of businesses are looking for, because students these days just don't write well enough so that people can follow what they're saying.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming here. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you, Avalon. It was a great treat.
I'm looking forward to your lecture tonight. I'm going to go.
Well, I'll look out for you, and thank you again for inviting me to be here.
Yeah, okay, we'll be right back with the news.